Hello, my name is João Medeiros, and I'm here at Canterbury Christ Church University, near London, precisely in Canterbury, with tutors Voss and Geoffrey Cornelius. They run a master in Mito, Cosmology and the Sacred. And I'd like to ask them in what consists this master and what do students can expect from it.
Want me to answer that? So the master's programme is in the education faculty at Christ Church University, and it's about transformative learning in a very broad sense, but it's mainly about looking at Western esoteric traditions as potential sort of carriers of this transformatory process for students. And it's very unusual in that it asks students to be very reflective of their own experiences and their own spiritual paths and their own deeper understandings of religious experience and experiences of the sacred, but also to be enlightened by and informed by our rich tradition of esoteric wisdom in the West.
Very fascinating. And so, as I understand, you are saying that it's not only like an educational program, but that students can really change themselves or transform themselves by studying these Western traditions and being a bit touched and transformed by it. Is that it, Geoffrey?
Yes, it is it. What's very important is that we can bring the academy together with these understandings. Many people have spiritual and religious understandings, but there isn't a way in which they can share those or reflect on them with others who are on similar but not the same path. So we have students from many backgrounds spiritually who are interested in this process of learning, and we find that people change themselves. It's not we as tutors who do it, but we create a space that enables people to make this search for themselves. So we don't teach any one particular thing, although we have certain ways of opening up the material. The Western esoteric and religious traditions are very much ways of opening the material, and divination is a way of opening the material, but we aren't teaching material, we're allowing things to blossom amongst the students.
Oh, very well. And you're having good feedback from the students from that method?
Yes, it is extraordinary, and I say this quite honestly to you, that I'm amazed by the responses that I get from students, and I feel quite humbled by this, because these people, they're my peers, they're fellow men and women, and their experience of life might be much richer than mine in many respects, or they've studied this and studied that, and they find that this is a place where they can take leaps and bounds in their own self-understanding. So that is very moving, and it's quite often repeated. That experience is much repeated amongst the students.
And that's partly because we have elements of the programme which are very creative, so it doesn't just involve writing essays in an academic format. It involves kind of deep reflection and journaling, and also a creative project where they actually need to create something artistic or poetic, which enables them to gain understandings that they wouldn't any other way.
It's very interesting, and I would say it's not so common in universities to have such kind of programs, because we have the idea of master programs being very academic and theoretical and not practical, and it's very interesting to know that you are seeing the things a bit different in a more active role from the part of the student.
Yes.
You mentioned other things, which is the program also includes divination and the sacred. And how do you think that divination and the sacred meet the standards of beliefs of the university system?
Well, we and I am very interested in that interface of academic and philosophical thought and these topics, and I think each can learn from the other in this respect. So I'm an astrologer, and in my area, modern astrology very much needs what the academy can offer in terms of thoughtfulness and reflection and citation of sources. It needs that. And I'd like to have more educated diviners and astrologers and symbolists. That would help everybody. But in turn, this brings to the university another whole dimension of human experience that is normally lost it's lost in the West, this type of sharing of this experience. Intellectual people can hardly begin to share it with each other. It becomes almost a taboo. So we're in a way breaking some taboos here.
I think so. I think you're really breaking taboos, and I like to continue with that point. I didn't say before, but both Angela and Geoffrey are excellent astrologers. They have research in this field, and as Geoffrey told before, astrology is part, at least the philosophical system of thought of astrology is part of the program. I'm particularly interested because I'm an astrologer, and is in that quality that I interview you as well. And I would like, before asking questions about astrology itself in society and about astrology in your program, I would like to know a bit more of your path in these spiritual areas. I know that I met Geoffrey in a conference in Wyboston Lakes some years ago, and then I read his book, Moment of Astrology, and if you study astrology and have never read such a book, you should read, because it's a really awesome and different book in a philosophical way, and because it addresses the critiques to astrology and responds to those critiques in a very intelligent way. And Angela has wrote many essays in astrology and has a lot of research as well. So I'd like to know, starting with Angela, how did you get to these areas of spirituality and spirituality in the university? Because you are the founders of this program.
It's quite a long story, but I'll try and make it very brief. I started life as a musician.
As a musician?
And I was playing and studying Renaissance music. And through my studies in the Renaissance, I discovered a 15th century astrologer and philosopher called Marsilio Ficino, who took me by the scruff of the neck and said, you've got to write about my practice of astrology for academics, because no one's understood how important it was as part of the Platonic revival in the Renaissance. So I wrote about Ficino and his astrological musical therapy that he practiced for my PhD thesis. I'd already learnt to be an astrologer myself. So I was both a musician and astrologer, very interested in the role of the imagination in Neoplatonism in the Renaissance to achieve religious, spiritual sort of, knowing. And when the opportunity arose back in about 2000, I think it was, to begin teaching in these areas at the University of Kent, that's how it all started. And both Geoffrey and I had moved to Kent, and were in the right place at the right time. And then we received a large amount of money from a private individual to begin setting up courses and then the master's degree. And I think it was all part of a divine providential plan.
So beautiful what you're saying. And I found it very interesting as well that you started with music. And myself, I think sometimes astrology is like a musical code. And Marsilio Ficino was a big thinker in this area, and then you went to Kent, and then you both gathered, and then the project goes on. And you, Geoffrey, how did you get here?
Yes, by another route, I suppose, but very related, because I was always interested in matters of the occult from a young age, and interested in tarot quite early, and divination is a great interest of mine. And then I discovered Jung, and that started me on a whole way of understanding. So I've taken in several different fields of study in my time. I got involved quite strongly in adult education, so I was a very early tutor in adult education astrology classes, which are evening classes for the ordinary population. And we managed to get astrology on the programme and other unusual subjects like dreams and Buddhism on the syllabus. And so I've always been involved. I love adult education, which is quite different in its ethos, really, to junior education, in that you are dealing with life experience of fellow adults, and they often get neglected in our culture. But people actually often have a spiritual turn quite late on in their life, and they're looking for something else, and really we're part of offering them a way of exploring these things. So I think it's a wonderful project.
Very, very nice. And you pointed out another thing that normally people think the other way around, as you said, because they don't think that education is for the whole life. For instance, in Portugal, I think in Spain, very similar. Normally people think education, like university, like something for late, beginning of the 20s and no more. But people need to continue to learn for their whole lives. And especially when age comes more and more advanced, spiritual areas. And so there is the need for a spiritual education and theological education that you provide, I think. I have many other questions. I'm trying to select them. I'd like to ask first Angela, because you are university teachers, and you are astrologers, and you are researchers. And you have both practices, like teaching at university and practicing astrology. As practicing astrologers, you do consultations or not. How do you cope with both functions? Do they mix very well, or how do you do it?
I've never seen them as kind of opposite, or I see them as very complementary. I've always seen studying as a spiritual exercise. I've always understood the act of reading as a sort of symbolic interpretation. And I think looking at a birth chart and helping somebody understand themselves through those symbols is just another part of how they would understand themselves if they were reading Jung or reading another text that really gripped them, and spoke to them deeply. So I don't see them as particularly different. And I've always felt that they complement each other, and both are soul activities, really, and that studying should be a soul activity when one's deeply engaged with it. It's just that in most sort of post-Enlightenment ways of thinking about academic work, it becomes a totally mind-based activity and doesn't engage the heart. So from the heart's point of view, I think these are just different modes, different modalities of learning about the world and oneself.
So they relate very well in your case?
For me they do, yes.
And you, Geoffrey?
Yes, the same. They relate very closely. I practice as... I love teaching astrology, so I do quite a lot, not just at the moment, but I plan to do a lot more teaching of astrology, even at very basic level. I like teaching it. I also do supervision work rather than do one-to-one lay client work. I do work with people who are already symbolists or astrologers, and I do some of that work privately.
Sorry to interrupt, but you teach astrology inside or outside the university?
Outside the academy.
Outside the academy,
yes.
Okay.
I don't see it... We often have this sort of debate, actually, Andrew and I don't see it as part of my function to teach people in the MA astrology.
Okay.
I want to help them understand issues of astrology, but it isn't my purpose to teach astrology. My mode would be very different if I was teaching astrology. You'd have a different set of understandings to work through, different program. But I don't, as with Andrew, I don't see it as separate. So what happens is we sometimes get people who contact me in supervision will then become interested in the university's work and the work we can do here. So
one thing complements the other.
And another thing, you see, in my own academic studies, such as they are, because they get put to one side all the time, I am interested in the study of the phenomenology and hermeneutics of divination. This is my study area. And then it means that things I come across there are directly part of what I do in the course and talk with on the course. Mm-hmm. Things that students say to me here feed directly into my studies and understanding. And so for me, the project of astrology becomes enhanced by the work we do here and that I'm attempting to do. So I never want to see a divide occur between the academy and true practice of work that we do.
So both feed each other in some
Both
way.
should feed each other, and they do, yes,
very
they
nice.
do.
Do you think that, because you've been through many stages in your process of learning and teaching astrology and the sacred, in my country I feel a bit some moral critique against astrology because of the image of astrology in the newspapers. In your case, how do you cope? Do you feel like that here in the UK or not? Angela, what do you think?
We had some trouble at a previous university, didn't we? With,
Yes.
With a very, very strong reaction against astrology being associated with the university at all. And in fact, that programme was closed down mainly because we were introducing astrology and they didn't like it. That's the only time I've personally ever felt any hostility.
But besides that, no problem at all.
Here, we've had no problem at all.
No.
And I think it's partly because we're in the education faculty, which is much, much more tolerant in terms of techniques and methods, creative methods that you use with students. And once people could see that what we were doing was academically viable and that we were drawing in lots of students and had excellent external examiner reports, they could see that it was academically sound. Their attitude is really, well, just get on with it because it's working and the students are enjoying it. And I haven't come across any ideological objections in this university.
No,
neither you
at all.
Not in this university. I agree, Kent was a different climate. There is another hidden element to this as well, that Kent is actually quite secular.
Secular.
And this university, with its Anglican foundation and the chaplain here and everything, there are people here who still do think there is something important in Christianity to work for, and they're not at all hostile to the sort of work we do. They can see that we're serious about religious and spiritual practice, and that seriousness is rare in our culture. And so we have that underlying support, I think, from the institution itself.
As you can see, in the case of Angela and Geoffrey, they are very cultivated and educated teachers, and that studied their whole lives these matters, and still they practice and study astrology, and are able to gather astrology with other philosophies of thought and teach them at the faculty. And this is a big difference against the normal image that people have of astrology, because they are very serious in the research. They're very serious. They are both Capricorn, I think.
Yes, both very serious.
They are both Capricorn, so they're extremely serious in what they do. Geoffrey, because I know better his work, he's very critical about the way astrologers do astrology many times, and he's the first one to raise the ethical questions. So probably people that are seeing this video or listening to this audio can see a different energy or a different approach or a different attitude. So my question right now is this: astrology and society, astrology and modern society. Do you think that astrology has a role in society as a tool, as a philosophy, as a mean of self-development? Do you think it's growing, or the opposite, or is it decaying in terms of the interests of society? I've been told from people from London that people were more interested in runes than in astrology. How do you think things can grow or happen are happening in the present and in the future? Angela.
Well, I think that everybody has this kind of sixth sense and finds a way of working with it in some way, even if it's completely alien from their normal everyday life or working pattern. And I think that, things that are easier for people to pick up and use, maybe like runes or tarot cards, may be more appealing. But for example, my 26-year-old son, who a few years ago was totally sceptical about everything, has just become deeply immersed in astrology through looking at various websites and web apps and technology. So I think that's a way forward for the next generation. Once they realise they can just sort of press a button on the phone and they come up with a daily forecast which may intrigue them, and then they might want to know further. And I can see in his generation quite a strong interest in getting past this kind of rational mind limit that's been set to them by their education. So I have hope that actually, I think it is growing in that generation. It's probably a sort of middle generation where there's not much happened between us and them, as it were.
Yes.
But I do feel there's something. People are so frustrated and bored with the sort of current way of looking at the world. In fact, the kind of limitations of thinking, I think. And I don't think it will ever die. I think this sense people have that they can ask some unknown power to reveal something to them, whatever context it is so innate to the human being that I'm optimistic. Yeah. What about you, Geoffrey?
Yes, the question for me is a very complex one, actually, João, because there are for me issues about astrology itself that astrologers need to understand and penetrate for themselves more strongly before they'll find the accord that a society would in fact give them if they could find that. I know that sounds obscure and incomprehensible, but if you know my work, you'll know that I'm not, you see, a critic of popular astrology as such, because and that's very important to make this point, that the existence of the sun signs or star signs, as known in the popular press, keeps alive this extraordinary poesis of astrology. And so what can one say to that? It's like popular music. One can say, oh, we should not have popular music because it's bringing things down. No, this is incorrect. Everyone has music and everyone has symbol. So for the popular world, there are the symbols for astrology keep something alive. Somebody then can become intrigued and begin to look further. So it is then a gateway. And there are many times as a serious astrologer that I know how very exact a simple sun sign description is. And I know if I spoke to any serious astrologer such as yourself, you'll know what fun the sun signs are. Sometimes they come to life and they're full of fun. So how can one deny this?
That's
Yes.
an intriguing point of view for who knows your work well, because it's a nice comparison between the regular sun sign newspapers and the popular music. As an astrologer, I cannot say I'm fully in that point of view, but I understand that you might have some reason that it's better to have it than don't have it, and you're also a bit critical about other practices in astrology, like horary astrology, for instance.
There is a huge astrology, as you know, raises absolutely huge questions about the nature of human being and the nature of destiny itself. And there is a strand that can come into very serious astrology that is highly deterministic. And so that does concern me, because at that point we begin to run into difficulty with many, many different understandings in society. And to my mind, the deterministic element in astrology arises from a somewhat faulty cognition of the processes at work in astrology. That is my view, and I can, as you know, would argue
you
that
have
quite
a
strongly.
famous phrase that I use a lot in my courses, which is, if I recall, fate is negotiable.
Destiny is negotiable.
Destiny is negotiable.
Yes.
So it's implicit that there is no determinism, absolute determinism, but free will is present in your practice, in your philosophy of astrology.
To my mind, astrology and true divination grants people, puts people in the place of
Empowers
imagination where they are truly find their free purpose, and their decision is then at the heart of it. That's very odd, and it's the reverse of what it can seem
odd.
to be.
It's the reverse. Yeah.
Reverse.
I'll finish with the last question. As we said, we are in Canterbury, which is the birth of Christianity in England, and talking about this program of myth, cosmology, and the sacred. And now my last question is this: do you think you're being pioneers in introducing spirituality and the astrological thinking in university, in society, or not?
I think this program is definitely pioneering. I mean, there are other programs that look at the cultural aspects of astrology within history, but I think the pioneering aspect is the transformative learning.
The transformative learning.
Program. And I think to be working towards dialogue and communication between paganism, Christianity, here in Canterbury is quite an extraordinary thing. And I feel somehow we've been drawn here to do this, whatever the future may hold. So yes, I think it's very significant that we're in Canterbury, and we had a student a few years ago who was an artist who created a beautiful image of the goddess Sophia of wisdom, and she set her in a cathedral, in a niche of the cathedral, and she was sort of semi-draped, sort of naked, and she was here in the chapel, on the wall of the chapel, for several months, and that to me was like a kind of supreme achievement of natural magic, if you like, that we managed to sort of bring these worlds together. So yes, that's what we're seeking to do, and I think in that we are really quite unique. I don't know of anywhere else there's anything like this.
Yes, I don't want to I'm cautious about laying big claims, but what we're doing is part of a pioneering movement. I must put down the place of honour as well for the milieu from which we came in the university, which was the programme in the MA programme in mysticism and religious experience at Kent University, where I was a student. That's where I got my master's, and Angela was on. You then became a tutor on the programme, of course, and I learnt from my teachers there, and that programme too was concerned with getting people to share the nature of religious and mystical experience, and so that's very in tune with what we're doing here. So there are always people who've gone behind, who've actually given you the next step to take, and we take the next step of a long path of steps. So,
magnificent. I'd like to thank you this splendid conversation and give you the congratulations for this program.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you. Yes.